Evolutionary biology is measured. It happens. Creationism is only a belief. We got a YouTube comment, right? Now, first of all, I would call that very par for the course. There's no, he gives no argument here. No, this is this or that. He just says, you idiot, everybody knows this, without telling you what this is. And I was just talking with Doug about this. I said, this is the truth. We cannot prove that God created the heavens and the earth any more than they can prove it all happened by chance 13 billion years ago. All right, we just have this evidence of what happened in the past. That past might be 6,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 13 billion years ago, whatever. But no one can go back to check, you know? So, our friend, if you listen to this, I'm just glad he watched. I don't know, maybe he'll watch this one. So I hope you don't find this stupid, but just some ideas and some evidence here. Here's a quote. This is kind of wrapping up last week's here a little bit. Fossils are fickle. Bones will sing any song you want to hear. And that's from an evolutionist who said that, by the way. And that's what we see quite often with the missing link, especially the missing link monkey to man stuff. All of the different categories of our so-called ancestors. They can tell you any story they want to tell you about those bones. They gave a skull, that they dug up and dated as old, whatever that means, to 8 different artists. It said, draw what you think this person would have looked like. Now, what do you think they got? Do you think they got 8 that look kind of similar? No. They got 8 wildly different renderings. Some of them standing upright, looking more like us. Some of them more hunched over, knuckle dragging, kind of middleman. So it just depends where do you want me to put the picture? You want it closer to monkey or closer to man? I'll draw it however you want. All right, but one of the big things for us and where we are today is the flood of Noah. The story of Noah's Ark. We love it as kids. It's a key to the creation idea. Okay, when we're looking at the evidence of the world, from the strata layers, especially the stuff we see like in the Grand Canyon, the fossils, the fossil record, the mountain ranges, continental drift, all of that stuff, for us, you have to have a worldwide catastrophic flood event to make sense of it all. But when you do, it all lines up rather neatly. Imagine that. Whereas for evolutionists, they would say there's no chance there was a worldwide flood. What you are looking at shows long ages. Okay? So we want to consider the evidence. That's what we want to do. And you tell me, do you think this sounds like something that happened 6,000 years ago with a big flood, or does this sound like something that took ages and ages to cover? All right. So Bill Nye, this is what he has to say about our buddy Noah and his ark. I pick on Bill Nye a lot, if you haven't noticed, because he makes it so easy, let's be fair. He says some outlandish things and acts like they're fact. And Bill Nye, the science guy, does not have a doctorate in science. He's just some guy that had a kid's show. If the best in the modern world couldn't build a large seaworthy ship, what reason would anyone think that 8 unskilled ancient people could? And this is a very common philosophy of evolutionists, of scientists, and really of us too. We're all susceptible to this idea. And the idea is this: we're the smartest people that have ever been on this planet. Every generation thinks that. And we have reason to, right? We have iPhones in our pockets and computer screens and all this kind of stuff. We're doing things that our ancestors before us did not do. So we all think we're the brilliant ones, right? We've got it all together. So that's what this idea is kind of talking about here. All right, but let me show you a few things that we know are out there. And yet we have no idea how to do it ourselves today. So the pyramids, I love the pyramids. Has anybody kind of followed the recent discoveries of the pyramids? I guess they did some LiDAR, radar kind of stuff underneath the pyramids, and they found like gigantic structures going down. Aiden, what is it? Like a mile? Something crazy like that. Pillars going down into the earth underneath the Great Pyramids. Like, we have no idea why, what the purpose of that was. And I don't know how great the LiDAR, radar stuff that they use is or what will ever come out of this. But the bottom line is the old story that the pyramids were like tombs, that's been proven false a long time ago. They have never found a body in the pyramids. They have found a bunch of other stuff that they can't figure out what it is. So you have the Great Pyramids. You have this middle picture is an 18-story underground city that's able to sustain 20,000 people. They found that. We don't do that today. They found these interlocking blocks. You see those blocks that look like H's? Those are ancient people cut and carved those. But they have like laser-like precision. Stuff that we could do possibly with the laser, but we cannot do by any hand tools that we have today. And then they've made, like the pyramids, like you hear about this a lot, the size of these blocks that are in place, these massive blocks. And the quarry, they think was, so far away, up the Nile or whatever. They have no idea how they got these stones into place. The largest cut stone that they have ever discovered is this stone right here. It is estimated to weigh 1,000 tons. That's 2 million pounds. We, today, 2025, as smart as we are, cannot lift 2 million pounds. Right? Now, Bill Nye says, well, what makes you think if we can't build a seaworthy vessel that these ancient people can? Because the mindset is they're just coming out of the caves and Neanderthal, and we're the evolved smart ones. But there's so much stuff around the world. Here's where, this is a fun thing. You ever heard of the show Ancient Aliens? Okay? So Ancient Aliens is looking at all this kind of fun stuff. Now, their conclusion, again, because the mindset is ancient man is dumb and we're smart, their conclusion to all this stuff is E.T. came and did it. That's right? Which is I like the show because of what they teach you, the history and stuff. And you just don't go with their conclusions. Their conclusions are, outer space extraterrestrials helped mankind in the past. All right? I think let's just talk about it this way. Do you notice that the older you get, the wiser you get? No? You have experience and wisdom. Do you remember how dumb you were when you were 16 and some of the stuff you did? All right? And then, we look to our elders with wisdom, that have the wisdom of a lifetime. And our elders might be 80, 90. By the time they're 100, we're not getting much out of them anymore in terms of wisdom, but... Right? Okay, well, how old was Noah? 700 something years, 600 years when he started building the ark. You know how long it took him to build the ark? Anybody know? 100 years. 100. So don't tell me that these 8 unskilled ancient people could not possibly build the ark. First of all, they had 100 years to do it. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I could build an ark if you give me 100 years. Right? I don't know that I could go get all the animals that he had, but God helped with that part. So the flood event, I think there's a lot of important stuff here. Have any of you seen the idea that they've discovered the ark on a mountain there in Turkey or whatever it is? All right, don't go down that rabbit hole with your friends if you're talking about creation, evolution, and the flood. Did they find the ark? I don't know. Maybe. There is a boat-like indent in the ground. That's what they found. Could it be something else? Yeah, it really easily could be something else. So we don't want to like jump on arguments that are pretty wishy-washy, because then it undermines all of our good arguments. So the idea that they found Noah's ark, pretty wishy-washy argument. So here's some of the stuff from here. The flood account. Oh, I'm looking at my screen, not yours. The flood account is in Genesis 6-8. Okay, read it on your own at some time. But here's some of the highlights of the actual weather event. Okay, from Genesis chapter 7. This is focusing on the description of the flood. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. A couple of thoughts. First of all, 40 days and 40 nights. We hear that phrase a lot in the Bible, right? It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. The Israelites wandered the desert for 40 years. It's quite possible that that's like a phrase that was used to designate a really long time. 40 days and 40 nights. And everyone goes, a long time. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily like calendar-specific 40, 24-hour days. We don't need to be that literal in the reading of this. You could be, but we don't need to be. The second thing is you got water coming 2 ways, up and down. Now, we're used to the water down. It's raining. It comes down. What we're not used to is the water coming up, the bursting forth of the great deep. And we talked about this a little bit in the first week. How, what happens to water under pressure? Okay? Incredible amount of energy and heat, well beyond the boiling points. And when that pressure is released, how many of you use like a pressure cooker in your house to cook? You kick that thing and the steam comes flying out. Well, put that on a planet-sized scale. Okay, that water's shooting out. The flood thing goes on. For 40 days, the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. The waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 15 cubits. Now, the big argument, there's not enough water on the planet to bury the mountaintops that we have. I'm not suggesting that the water covered the Rocky Mountains or any of that kind of stuff. I'm suggesting that the Rocky Mountains were born out of the flood. They had mountains, not like we have today, okay? So I'm suggesting is that a lot of the features that we see, the tectonic plates, are a result of that ripping open of the fountains of the great deep. All right. Every living thing that moved on land perished: birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swam over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. People and animals and the creatures that move along the ground and the birds were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left and those with him in the ark. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. All right. So there's this concept of universal flood accounts. And this is just a Google search. You type in universal flood accounts. The concept of universal flood accounts refers to the widespread presence of flood myths and legends across various cultures and time periods, suggesting a common origin or shared experience related to a global flood event. These accounts, while varying in details, often share common elements such as a deity sending a flood as punishment, a hero building an ark or vessel, and the preservation of a remnant of humanity and animals. It's going to get small. I apologize. So many flood legends, including the Genesis account of Noah's flood, share key themes. This is all from Google. I just want you to know that. This is what Google says, and then I'll give you what I say. A deity or equivalent sending a flood as a punishment for humanity's wickedness. They all share the idea that a hero or a family, being warned ahead of time, built a vessel, an ark, a boat, to survive the flood. The flood destroyed the pre-existing world, the survival of a remnant of humanity and animals in the boat, the flood receding and the vessel landing on a mountain, and the repopulation of the world after the flood. That's the common theme that you hear in all of these flood accounts from every ancient culture throughout the world. Now, scholars have noted that the Genesis flood narrative may have connections to earlier Mesopotamian flood myths like the Epic of Gilgamesh. The flood story in Genesis is considered by some to be dependent on the Mesopotamian epics, particularly Gilgamesh. Didn't come first. Noah's flood, historically in the documents, happened first. The flood, the Epic of Gilgamesh, is the telling of Noah's Ark in a different culture after. So they have that one's pretty easily shot down in terms of an argument. The presence, why did I get that? Oh, did I skip too far here? Here we go. Did that one. There we go. Cultural. While there are similarities, each flood myth also has unique characteristics reflecting the culture that produced it. For example, the Chinese legend Fuhi and his family escaping the flood is quite different from the Babylonian flood myth. They're all myths, according to Google, mind you. Now, this is the interpretation from Google. The presence of universal flood accounts raises questions about their origin and meaning. Some interpretations suggest that all cultures may have descended from a common ancestral source that experienced a global flood. And the flood stories are their way of remembering that event. Other interpretations suggest that these myths are not based on a real historical event, but are a reflection of a universal human tendency to create stories about powerful forces of nature and the origins of the world. Have you heard of the concept of Occam's razor? It's a scientific idea that the most obvious answer is probably the answer. So what's the most obvious answer? Okay, that they all have this shared story. Not this, there's somehow it's innate in humanity to make up a flood story, and that all of these cultures around the world have that same innate thing in humanity, so we all created the same story? That seems pretty far-fetched to me. So here, I'll just go fast through this here. Here are the flood accounts. Okay? Those are the flood accounts around the world. So how is this possible? Well, the next story in the Bible is the Tower of Babel. They were all together. Everybody there knew Noah, or at least knew the story. And then God said, you know what? I told you to spread out and fill the earth. So he came down and he confused their language. But they all know the story. And so all of these ancient cultures start at the Tower of Babel. They all have the story. Now, do some of them morph a little bit and change? Yeah. And which one would we say didn't change? The biblical account. And why would we say that? Because this is the divinely inspired word of God, and God is protecting the narrative. That's what I would say. Okay? All right. So there's a couple of different theories when it comes to the flood account. The two main theories are known as the canopy effect or the hydroplate theory. I like the hydroplate a little bit more, but there's certainly some aspects of the canopy that are intriguing. So, where did I go? The canopy effect. The idea of the canopy effect, it's drawing again from Scripture. When God creates in the beginning, and God creates the water, it says that creates the sky. In Genesis, it says that the sky separates the water below from the water above. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense unless you want to count clouds as water above. Typically, we wouldn't. But again, the Bible is not a scientific textbook. It's not trying to give us the science behind this. It's just giving us a description. So the canopy effect is kind of focusing in on that idea of water above, water below, and what's called the firmament, which would be the sky that would separate the two. Well, in the canopy effect, you have a layer of water of some kind above us somewhere in our atmosphere before you get to outer space. Okay? Well, what would something like that do? First, it would increase the pressure of the air that we breathe. Second, it would increase the oxygen level in our atmosphere. They have found, they find it quite often, fossilized sap known as amber. It's the Jurassic Park. You remember in Jurassic Park when they get the amber and there's the mosquito in there and they drill in, and in the mosquito they get the dino DNA. That's the whole Jurassic Park movie in a nutshell. Okay, well, they do find amber, petrified sap, and that has air bubbles in it, and essentially it's like capturing the air from whenever that sap was made into amber. It's like a snapshot, if you will, of the atmosphere. And every time they find those pieces of amber and they check the air, there's the oxygen levels like 2.5 times what today's oxygen level is in that amber. It's fascinating to me. Well, what happens when you have greater oxygen and greater atmospheric pressure? And then the third thing is, what's the number one thing that ages us? Yeah, the sun. The sun. That's what ages the earth, everything. So, if you have a layer up there of water filtering out the sun's rays, less harmful. So what would be the byproduct? Well, you'd have longer life. Well, what do we see in the Bible? Really old people living before the flood. And then what happens after the flood? The lifespans drop rather quickly. In fact, even God says, I'm going to limit you to 120 years. What else would we have seen? You would have seen ridiculous plants. So they had a guy that, testing this canopy effect idea, he grew a tomato plant, a cherry tomato plant, under what they thought might be the conditions under the canopy. Greater oxygen level and under pressure in a chamber, okay? That cherry tomato plant grew like 65 feet tall, and the tomatoes were the size of softballs, and it produced something like 900 tomatoes. You know, it was just insane. Well, okay, so you start putting that back. The giant plants, all this kind of stuff. Well, what did all the vegetation and all the plants turn into after they were buried during the flood? Huh? Not fossils. I mean, oil. Oil. And they go, oh, there's not enough plants on the earth to make that much oil. Well, there would have been if the plants were gigantic, right? So stuff like that. And then the last thing about the canopy effect is what's the thing that God puts into place after the flood that promised to never flood the earth again? The rainbow. Now, the rainbow, as we know scientifically, is just the refraction of light, prism, that kind of stuff. It happens naturally by light. Well, why were there no rainbows before? Why was this new? Did he invent the science of prisms at that moment? Or did the water canopy that would have stopped a prism and a rainbow disappear, and now you have this thing that shows up? So that's the canopy effect. The other theory then is the hydroplate theory. So that's the planet Earth. The gray is the continents, and so the colored stuff would be our oceans. And that red seam, like a seam of a baseball, is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which just runs across the entire planet. So that, in this theory, that is where the fountains of the deep burst forth. And we might have had a single continent at that time where you could see everything would have fit together right with that ridge. And when that stuff split open and that pressurized water shot out, the continents went flying. Okay? Rapid movement until they came up to some resistance and some pressure, and they buckled up. And that's where you get your mountain ridges that follow the line of where those things would be going, the Rocky Mountains, the Alps, and that kind of stuff. Now, here's some other fun thoughts about the hydroplate theory. I think the hydroplate theory does the best job at describing the violence of the flood. Just how crazy this would have been. It also accounts for meteors and comets. Because part of the ancient Earth thing is they try to count how many meteors or comets hit the Earth, and then they go, here's how many we think have hit the Earth, and then this is how old the Earth is as a result, right? It's that kind of weird math that they like to do. The hydroplate theory would suggest that almost all the meteors and comets that have come into contact with Earth or anything else in our solar system came from Earth and were shot out into space at the flood event. That's how violent it is. All right, which is why you sometimes find water on comets, where water is not everywhere it's certainly nowhere else in our solar system. Now again, this is just theory stuff. It's just kind of making sense of it all. You can't prove any of this stuff. All right. Flood and fossils. We don't have time to do it, but this little short video is talking about how during the flood, that's when the fossils would have been laid down, most of them. Most of the world's fossils. That's when we would have seen most of the strata layers that we see on planet Earth that tell evolutionists old age. Look at all those old ages. That stuff is laid down. You know the problem with calling strata old age? Right? Where's all this stuff coming from? Do you go outside every day and you're like, oh, I got to step a little higher on my yard today because we're building a new layer? No, we have erosion happens all the time. There's no growth of this stuff. So in the flood of this violent event, everything in the ocean gets stirred up. And now, have you ever had dirt or sediment or anything in a liquid? You shake it up and it's all there, and then you just let it sit, and then what happens is it all starts to settle. And it'll settle by viscosity. Some things heavier will get to the bottom, lighter, and so forth. Okay, so that's what we would say, that's how the strata was laid down. And we've actually, fun fact, seen it happen with our own eyes when Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980. We saw this stuff drop, and then the next year there was a localized flood that carved a canyon that looks very much like the Grand Canyon, only smaller, and it has all of these strata layers. just like the Grand Canyon, except we watched it happen. Now, we still like to, school textbooks still like to say the Grand Canyon was formed by the Colorado River, a little bit of water over a long period of time, slowly carving out the rock. It would have had to go uphill for the first half of the journey, a whole lot of things, okay? So then the fossil record. And we did this last week, but we'll just kind of briefly touch on it. What we see in the fossil record is exactly what you would expect from a flood perspective. You see sea life everywhere. 95% of all fossils are sea life. And they are found on every mountaintop in the world. Okay? Well, that's exactly what you would expect if the sea burst forth and then that just covered the earth. Second stuff you start to see a lot of are plants. And they're the next layer. And then beyond that, you get into simple cell stuff, the amoebas and the bacteria and stuff. And then you get into simple creatures, mammals, and then birds. Well, if the world is being flooded, that's exactly what we would expect. The fish get overwhelmed first. The trees and the plants that can't run away, they're next. The stuff that's a little bit better at running away, they're next. And then the stuff that flies is last. It's exactly what we see in the fossil record. All right. And now for something completely different. I got all these random thoughts. I'm just going to try. This has no linear sense. This is just random things that I find interesting in the whole creation evolutionary debate. You ready? Stick with me. All right. There's been some studies on bacteria and the evolution of bacteria, evolving from one thing to the next. Now, the cool thing about bacteria is that they can knock out 6 or 7 generations in a single day. Right? That's how. So if things evolve slowly over time, we can replicate a whole lot of time in bacteria relatively quickly by comparison. And they've been doing this for over 20 years, so they're well north of 45,000 generations, which would be the equivalent of 1 million years in human history. Cool. What'd they find? There's been some mutations. Some genes have turned off and turned on. Like you've heard of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Do you know what's happening to that bacteria? There's a receptor that's being shut off. In other words, it's a decrease of information. It's not hey, this bacteria got super smart and developed this new mechanism to protect itself from antibiotics. No, it shut off the thing that let the antibiotics kill it. And they've seen a bunch of these different mutations, and many of them, to be fair, have proven advantageous for that bacteria in that environment. So bacteria have the ability to live off of oxygen or off of citrate? What's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, whatever. And then they create an environment, and then it evolved, and it just started using that without the environment. But that's already tools that it had in its tool bag. You just got it to use those tools in a different way than it had before. You know what? After 45,000 generations of bacteria and 1 million equivalent years of human evolution, you know what they still have? Bacteria. And the bacteria that they've evolved into different things, if they were to put that bacteria into just a normal environment, it would die immediately because it's weaker and dumber than its natural counterparts, because it has had a decrease in information. That's all we see in all genome is a decrease. Mutations can prove advantageous, but it is a decrease of information that allows for that advantage, not an increase. All right, evolution has, this one's not that interesting so far. There's a lot of theories that prop up evolution. Like, remember that thing I told you about? If you have a theory and you find a false example that should falsify the theory immediately, that was the horse thing. My theory is all horses are brown, and I see a brown horse, it doesn't make my theory true. But if I see a white horse, it makes my theory false. Now, evolution doesn't have such of a thing because they just make up new theories to prop it up. Oh, you can't see that at all. Things like punctuated equilibrium, coevolution, uniformitarianism, abiogenesis, RNA world, panspermia, deep time, inflation. All of these are theories that they have created to keep evolution propped up even as it gets falsified. This is supposedly a 150-million-year-old squid fossil. The cool thing is, that picture of the fossil was drawn from squid ink from the fossil. That's amazing that the squid ink lasted 150 million years. I have pens in my drawer that died a week after I opened them, you know. All right, there's a bunch of different dating methods for old Earth and young Earth. There's about 100 different methods that they use to date the Earth. About 70 of them date the Earth as young, thousands of years. They don't tell you about those. They only tell you about the ones that talk about long times. Stalactites, they used to tell us, you go to a cave, you see these stalactites, stalagmites. That's representing millions of years of evolution. And then we started watching them grow. We're like, oh, those things are moving quite a bit faster than we thought were possible. You know, stalactite, stalagmite, it just has to do with the mineral content of the water. You get the right content that they produce, and they can grow where you can see differences in weeks, months, and years. Population metrics. Have you ever looked at the way the population of the Earth goes? You have this line, it's very low, you know, and then it does this to where we are today. And that is an actual, accurate population idea. 2 become 4, 4 become 8, 8 becomes 16, you know, so forth. And then it's like compounding interest. You know, you all are investing your money, and you see it doesn't do a whole lot, and then it shoots up. Well, that's exactly what we're seeing. And what we have today, 8 billion people, would line up perfectly with a reset, if you will, in the population at Noah's flood. If people have supposedly been around for 100,000 years, we should have 100 billion people on the planet by now. Remember I told you about the rock thing moving? How do you make that strata layer over time? Right? How does that lay down? It doesn't. That's what that is mud laid down in layers. It's still soft, and something pushes it while it's soft, and then it hardens, it becomes rock. Starlight. How far? They tell you, everybody knows. What's the farthest starlight that we see? 13.8 billion light years away. That's what they tell us. That's the age of the universe. Have you ever stopped to think, how do they know that? Huh? There's 2 ways. The first, who's the math nerds in the room? Trigonometry. You remember trigonometry? Sine, cosine, all that nonsense? Yeah, I'm not a math guy. So, to calculate a distance of a triangle, if you know 2 points, you should be able to calculate the 3rd point based on that math. Okay? So if you were trying to measure, let's say, the distance from Peachtree City to the Sears Tower in Chicago, you would need 2 points of reference that could see said tower from here, and you calculate the distances between the 2, and that tells you the distance to the 3rd. Okay? That's what they're using to tell you how far some stars are away. All right, but this is the math of it, right? Because you're talking about billions of miles when you talk about light years. It would be the equivalent of a triangle that is 1 billion miles away and an inch wide at the base. That's a very skinny triangle, very skinny. And there's no accuracy in that, none. In fact, they will even tell you that the best that the trigonometry method can get you is 100 light years. And we go, okay, maybe. And so to widen their triangle base, they take a measurement when Earth is here in January, and they measure the light of that star. And then in June, when we're on this side of our orbit, they measure the light of that star. And you think, oh, that's pretty far. It's 70,000 miles or difference or whatever, but you're talking about billions of years, millions of light years. So at best, they can tell you a star is 100 light years away, if you grant them all of their math. But they tell you that a star is 13.8 billion light years away. That's a lot more than 100. A lot more than 100. So then they turn to light, candlelight, and they use candlelight. It's like horsepower, right? When you go, oh, my car's got 100 horsepower. If 100 horses ran, that's how strong your car. They do the same thing with candles. They got candle light, and then that becomes the measurement of this stuff. But they're looking at these stars, and they go, well, we know this star is 100, and it's this bright, and that star is this bright, so that makes this star 1 million light years away, right? Whatever. So can you see a flaw in that logically right off the bat? How do they know that one's 100 million? And how do they know that the brightness would be the same? Is it the same kind of star? Does that star the same size? There are so many assumptions. So anytime somebody tells you that the universe is 13 billion years old because we see starlight from 13 billion light years away, deeply question that. There is no, and then here's the follow-up question. How can you possibly prove it? When they invented those laser measurement tools. Now, you got this thing, I pointed at the wall, and it says it's 20 feet to that wall. I'm like, oh, cool. When they built those, I'm sure that they did that, and then some guy got out the old school tape measure and measured it to see if the thing was accurate. But there's no possible way for us to ever accurately say, hey, you were right, it is 13 billion light years away. We got out the tape measure, right? So they just tell you this like it's total science fact, and they have no idea. No idea. All right. I got to find my phone. Oh, so here's 2 verses I want you guys to think about. This is, again, the Bible's not a textbook, but it says, it is I who made the earth and created mankind. My own hands stretched out the heavens. God made the earth by his power. He founded the world by his wisdom and stretched out the heavens. So when God created and he stretched it out, the light would have existed from where he created it to where he stretched it. So on day 1, that starlight was at Earth. Put a dot on a balloon, stretch it out. The dot's still there, but it also goes around the whole balloon. All right. Mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is the DNA that follows women. And in 2015, they discovered that all women can be traced back to 3 women in history based on mitochondrial DNA. And more recently, they went further back. Those 3 can be traced back to 1. Well, doesn't that fit our little narrative? Eve, the 3 daughters of Noah's boy, or 3 wives of Noah's sons that came off the ark. Okay. Finally, this idea of fine-tuning the planet. Life on Earth, they tell us, from an evolutionary standpoint, not that big of a deal. There's life everywhere, and the universe is so vast, there must be life everywhere. Have they found any anywhere? No. So they've started doing a thing where they have parameters necessary for life. Where does this planet sit in comparison to its sun? Is it too close to the sun and therefore too hot? Is it too far away from the sun and therefore too cold? Or does it sit in what's known as the Goldilocks zone, perfect for life? What we found that you need a moon positioned at the exact right distance to create tides in and out, which that pulsating thing generates our electromagnetic field. You need plate tectonics. You need liquid water. You need the right mix of oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen. They've come up with 22. That's the number they're up to. Parameters necessary for life. And amazingly, all of the 22 are finely tuned so that life can exist here on Earth. And they tell us, life should be everywhere based on how big the universe is. Well, here's some of the statistics for those of you who like statistics. Chris, this is for you. Statistics. All right. In the known universe, the atoms in the known universe is 10 to the 80th power. Okay? That's 10 followed by 80 zeros. The statistical probability of life in our finely tuned universe with the 22 parameters that we currently have to sustain life is 10 to the 229th power. So it looks like this. That's the number of atoms in the known universe. That's the statistical chance for life. Now that's just a bunch of zeros, so let me help you out here. That is 10 billion. That is 10 trillion. Those next go trillion, quadrillion, quintillion, sextillion, septillion, octillion, and then we kind of run out of tillions. We do have one more name. The biggest name that I could find is called centillion, which is 1 followed by 303 zeros. So this is 1 followed by 280, whatever I said, zeros. So it's a bigger number. The centillion is used in science to say it doesn't happen. It's fake, right? It is a number, 1 in that many zeros, but they're like, that means no, not going to happen. All right, so that's how blessed we are to be here. God created a perfect environment for our life to exist. And it does not exist anywhere. As much as they tell you ET is everywhere, and all of the fun stuff with the UFO files coming out and all this kind of stuff. Life does not exist anywhere but here. And if they ever find life, if ET shows up and goes, hey, we've been here all along, would that change our faith? No. I would wonder if Jesus showed up at their planet. How that went. But no. All right. We're out of time. I thank you for your time these last 3 weeks. This is a fun topic for me. There's a lot more material we could do. I did print all of the PowerPoint for the last 3 weeks and one thing that you can grab if you're so inclined. Plenty of more information than I covered. And I welcome all questions if you ever ask. Just send me an email. Hey, thank you. Woo.